Okay. The next topic is a little bit bigger. It will span multiple slides, so please bear with me. And consider this code. The developer wrote this piece of code, and they rely on person get name on the method returning the same value when you call it a second time, right? So I'm not holding it against them because their code might work completely fine. So that's why, by default, PHPStan does not punish you for writing code like this. It just assumes that you've already checked what the method returns, and it's not going to complain that you might be accessing something that's null, because PHPStan by default considers this method to return the same thing. So this is an example where it works in our favor because it's probably obvious that this code is going to be completely fine. But there are other examples where it might work against us. So we are inside a PHP unit test, and we asserted that person get name is null. Then we set the name, and on the next line we check that it's not null. But basically, because of this behavior, this is a very similar code. PHPStan is going to complain that call to method assert not null with null will always evolve to false. PHPStan is because of the first assert, PHPStan is going to think that the name is still null. So on one hand, it works in our favor, but on the other hand, it doesn't. So I would like to. I am showing you this so that you can understand when this happens, when this situation happens in your code, and what can you do about it. So this is also, as you notice, this is about pure and impure functions. So function purity is kind of a concept that describes how a function behaves. So function is pure, or method is pure, if it always returns the same value for the same input. And the input is a combination of the state of the object and also the values of the past arguments. And that's for methods, and for functions is just about arguments. And pure also means that the function doesn't have any side effects. And a side effect in a programming language is usually something like sleeping for a few seconds, or accessing the file system, accessing the database, printing something to the output, or depending on time, or asking about a value from a random function, and so on. So function is pure if it always returns the same value given the same state, so same inputs, and it's pure if it doesn't do anything, if it doesn't have any side effects like that. Okay, so the default behavior of PHPStan is that functions and methods that return a value are pure by default, so that this piece of code can work as we expect it to. Functions that return void are impure, because if a function that we are not supposed to read the returned value from is pure, then it couldn't do anything useful, right? Like void function always does some kind of side effect, some kind of impure things, changes state, or does something with a side effect. And constructors are pure by default because in most modern applications, the only thing constructor does is that it assigns values to properties. And if you call an impure method on an object, it forgets the state. So this example is going to pass without any errors if setName is a void function, because it will make the person to forget the state, and below calling the setter, the getName might be null or it might not be null as far as PHPStan is concerned. And this is the default behavior, which means that there's probably a way how to override it, right? So you can override it on a one-by-one basis, and the way to override it is with a PHP annotation called PHPStan impure. So if you have something that looks like a getter, it returns a value, but in fact it has some side effects or depends on some global state, then you can mark the method or a function as impure, and it will make PHPStan understand that even if we call it a second time after narrowing the type, it's possible that it's still going to be nullable. So it will make this kind of code work, because we need to have these PHP docs, these annotations, because when you are calling a function, PHPStan does not see its body. It doesn't see the implementation. It only looks at the PHP docs and at the signature, the parameter types and return types. It doesn't go inside the method, inside the function, because it would penalize the performance of the analysis. So we need to tell the analyzer what the various properties of functions are with these extra custom PHP docs like that. Okay, so we can override it by case basis with this annotation, and you can also reconfigure your project globally. So you can set in your PHPStan.neon, you can set remember possibly impure function values to false, and it's going to behave a different way. So it's going to penalize you that you are relying on a function to return the same thing when you call it twice in a row. So if you set this to false, and even if you narrow down the value returned by the getter, it's still going to be nullable when you ask for it a second time inside the if condition. So this is one of the stricter options that you can turn on, and basically it's going to force you to first assign the value into a variable and then continue working with the variable if you want to do that. But it's not the default, because people just expect the original example to still work. Okay, so we set this to false, and now sometimes we want the opposite to happen, right? So right now most functions are considered impure, but if you really have a getter and you still want this code to continue to work, to remember what the value is even after you call it a second time, then you can explicitly mark methods and functions as pure with this annotation.